Let's start with what led you to starting Supernova then?
Yeah, sure. What a good question. Well, I've worked my entire life in advertising. That's the adult life in advertising. And that, Gregor, is what I wanted to do from a child. Yeah, from very young. I was, I remember there was a TV commercial I saw, when I was 9 years old, and I remember what it was for. And I thought, God, I'd really like to make those. And I was just always very fascinated with, with the ability of the TV to reach people. And then as I discovered other media, just the concept, I think, really, of being able to share your thoughts with large, with a large group of people, with a group of people. And that always captured my imagination. I was always very fond of, movies and TV shows. And I saw that advertising was a way of bringing those two things together in an environment that would be slightly more stable. I was actually, than say, going into movies per se, or into acting or something like that. So I was very captivated by advertising right from the off, and sort of set to getting into the industry. And I was told it was quite competitive and quite difficult, and actually it certainly was back then. But I got sponsored by the wonderful Cadbury's to do a business degree, and then I was very, very, lucky. Really, I got to join Saatchi and Saatchi, kind of at their height, really, at that era of Saatchi's anyway, as they were becoming the world's favorite advertising agency, kind of like the only agency most people had heard of, really. And I joined them as a graduate trainee and just began my career, and I was hooked right from the outset. I mean, it's what I'd wanted to do, and I loved it. I loved doing it. So started doing advertising, and then just went through the evolution that you go through if you're sort of like pretty committed to your job, I guess. I just progressed as far as I could, then started my own thing in Amsterdam. About 17 years ago, I started my own ad agency in Amsterdam called Community. And it was a successful boutique, smallish agency, but successful. We had global business, global accounts from Canon, TomTom, Adidas, Philips, and some others. So we did well, and I could see, maybe it's like 10 years ago now that things were starting to change for this industry that I, had loved so much, and that I'd been so much a part of my life. And the thing that was changing really was the evolution of social media. I mean, digital media in general, but the arrival of Google, for example, search, all of these things that have come with the internet that were not there 15, 20 years ago. But if I could name one thing, it would be social media that's really changed the landscape, as I see it anyway. And, after a certain point, became kind of the only game in town. I mean, that is what advertisers wanted to talk about, is what they, became very captivated by. And I felt, well, I need to get into this more. I need to understand it more. And as I started to, I realized that there was an enormous capacity here for social media that was so highly prized by advertisers, for the two things to come together, really, to the benefit of the audiences that they're reaching. Because social media companies don't really have the costs and expense of other media channels. TV, they don't have to start studios. They don't have to pay actors. They don't have to pay reporters. They don't even have to pay for paper or ink. They don't really have the kind of setup costs. And so far as technology, it's true, it's undoubtedly a setup cost, and it's not cheap. It's enormously scalable. I mean, once you've built code, you've kind of got your model, you've got your machine, you've got your channel. You don't necessarily need vast numbers of people or huge amounts of buildings. The costs are pretty lean. It seemed to me. And I thought, well, there's an enormous opportunity there, and it's not really being shared very fairly, I don't think. There's so much. I mean, I know advertising. I know the kind of margins that were involved before you start looking at this. And I just don't think this is being very democratically shared. So I felt there was a huge opportunity there, really. And I started to think about what could I do about it? And as I say, I had this ad agency. So I came up with a concept that was before Supernova, actually. It was a forerunner to Supernova. And it's where I learned a lot, largely about what not to do, I might say. But, you got to go through it. And pretentiously for a minute, if Instagram had bourbon, then Supernova had a forerunner called Bar Glue, BAAGLOO. And I invested a lot of my money and my time in finding out how to make a more democratic social network. And my initial idea was that we would share the advertising revenue with the content creators. That seemed like a very democratic thing to do, seemed like a natural thing to do. So that's what I set out, and we did with Barglue. The thing is that I learned a few things. One is that Barglue is not a particularly catchy name. People, want to struggle with it. Bagaloo, Boogaloo, Bargaloo. And I come from a background where I know that these sort of things are just, really fundamentally important. You have to have a brand name that's memorable and that is motivating. And really Barglue wasn't either of those two things. So it was quirky, but it defined what we did in the first place, because the initial idea was that you would use a QR code. You'd scan a QR code to get into the app that we developed. So, barcode, bringing together the online and offline worlds, bar glue. So it's sort of a definitive of what it did, but it just wasn't catchy. The other thing is that there was no need to limit it to the scanning of QR codes. That, if anything, was a restriction. So there was no need for that. We discovered, and then there were some other problems. The next one was that this idea of democratizing by sharing with the content creators is a lovely idea, but you know what, you're not talking about a lot of money, not really. I mean, our users our community generate about the same amount of money for us per head as Facebook's generate for them, which is to say roughly £3 a month, £3 to £4 a month. Even if you split that down the middle, and go 50-50 on it, that's going to be like £1.50 for your average, community member. That's not a fortune. And it's only going to be motivational to people who really need the money. Now, those people really need help, and I want Supernova to help them. But advertisers need to be advertising to people that can afford to buy their products. So what you have actually is a problem, because you're attracting an audience that isn't going to attract a very high advertising premium. And that's just an economic fact. So you're better off, I discovered, making it a completely altruistic proposition, which is to say, look, you guys, the content creators, the community, you come in and nominate which charities you want to benefit from your top participation, but you won't get any money directly because there's no point. It's too little. It's too little for the individual. But if it's combined, it's a heck of a lot. So that was the second part of the proposition. The second thing I worked out, which was to turn everything towards a purposeful outcome, a purpose-led outcome, an altruistic end benefit. That was the second part of it. And the third part of it was to work directly with the advertisers, because when, as with Barglue, I was working through, I shan't go into too much detail about it, but what amounts to a sort of ecosystem that means there are a lot of people in the middle. And my experience of doing that was that absorbs all of the margin that you might otherwise be, well, in the case of big social networks, keeping this profit, or in our case, giving to charities. You need to remove that layer of middleman, and it's quite a layer, and work directly with the advertisers wherever possible. And those were the three things that I realized coming out of it. And so, about 18 months ago, all of that had crystallized for me. And so we had a new name, Supernova, a new proposition. It's the social network that gives back. And not too long after that, shortly after that, we were able to bring on board our first sponsor. And there are others that we've spoken to as well, but our first sponsor, ASICS, who are a terrific company, and who, have as their own outlook, movement for mind, and they are a very authentic, purpose-led brand. And it's important to us that we only work with authentic, purpose-led brands, by the way. Another reason we wouldn't have this ecosystem with anybody being able to advertise on Supernova is that some advertisers don't necessarily have a similar ethos to ours. And that would be a confusing element, we think, in our own brand proposition. But that's how it came about. That's how it happened. You know, I worked a long time in an industry that I could see could do a lot for good. And I didn't think that it was doing as much as it could. So I started something that does. It's kind of it. So and I think that same model and approach could be replicated in countless industries. I only know advertising, and that's why I'm doing it in advertising. But I feel sure that the same could apply in energy, in banking, you name it. I don't see why not. I just feel that you know, social media is an example of where there is a huge amount of wealth being concentrated into a very small number of hands, and that just doesn't seem right to me. Not when it's something, particularly when it's something that has society as a STEM word in its category description. You know, I don't see how social media would be something that benefits such a tiny section of society, and and it seems can be quite dangerous to the health of quite a large section of society. So we want to correct those things. And another reason we're called Supernova is that, or the other reason we're called Supernova is because we want to light up a new era in social media. And the supernova is simply the brightest thing in the universe. So that's what we want to be. We want to be the brightest, most positive thing in the universe of social media. And that's what we're, you know, that's what we are. And that's what we're, you know, letting the world know about now, thanks to podcasts like yours.
I think, well, one of the ways I prepare for this podcast is watching, I don't know if you've seen it on Netflix, A Social Dilemma. So I've rewatched that for the second time.
Oh yeah, I know. Wow.
So, yeah. And it seems like this is the solution that they're all talking about, is that sort of ethical, meaningful connections between people and advertisers, meaningful connections between people and their social media. How are you tackling so Facebook, Instagram are always obviously causing massive problems with kids' mental health. They're very addictive. How are you is that in your mind at all with Supernova?
Yeah, it is, absolutely. I think that's probably the greatest role that we're going to play, as a matter of fact. It's certainly our largest, biggest objective. I've got 2 Gen Zs myself. And as a parent, I'm concerned for the mental health of a generation that's grown up really only knowing social media and social media usage. And I don't see that this is about to change anytime soon. I mean, the data we see is that like 4 billion people now use social media. I think it's 4 trillion hours is a figure that always stuns me. So I kind of, in amazement, recall it. 4 trillion hours we'll collectively spend using social media this next 12-month period, an average of 2.5 hours a day. Anyway, sorry, to your point. Yeah, it is very much on my mind that, you know, something that we need to do. So we have this opportunity to do something about the corrosive effect of really self-comparison that we see on other social networks, and where they factored that into their user experience as a kind of reward for taking part, or at least a motivation for taking part. It's partly what's made it so addictive, I think. So what we're looking to do is kind of turn it on its head in terms of an experience. So through a complex collection of techniques that we've employed on Supernova, the experience is one that actually makes you feel uplifted rather than downcast. So if you become, I suppose, addicted is not a word that I'd choose to use, but if you become, if you want to use, if you find that you'll find yourself wanting to use Supernova a lot, it's because it makes you feel good, and because you're doing good is partly what's underpinning it. And I think that's one of the strongest motivations one of the strongest, most enduring reasons to feel good is that what you're doing is good, and we see this in other areas where dopamine's incurred, like induced, like in exercise. And that's a positive and quite addictive, but positive experience that you have, because you're out, maybe you're out running somewhere, or you're in a gym or whatever it is, but there's a feeling of physical and mental well-being that's going on. Well, in a similar way, or in a comparable way, I'd hope, anyway. Supernova plays to that side of your emotion, which is made to feel better because you're doing good. You see, whenever you use Supernova, you are automatically supporting the cause. And because as you come on board Supernova, you need to select one from one of 8 causes, which one you're going to support. Within each causal area, we have charity partners, and as you then use Supernova, you will be supporting that cause. Now, when you post, you don't have to support. You don't have to post to support your cause, but it is a more proactive way to do so. And when you post, if people like your post, their likes are like votes for your causal area to get a share of our action fund. Similarly, when you like someone else's post, then your like is a vote for their cause. So it's not so much the narcissism of being liked that's the motivation for you on Supernova. It is more the altruism of your cause getting supporters, and that you're part of a community or a group of people who are collectively supporting that cause. So you're not alone. So the presence of likes for your content, or absence of them, are less a comment on whether people like you or not, or whether people are failing to respond to you or not. It's more, a moment to celebrate on behalf of your chosen cause, or just to not get quite as many likes as the next person and cause have got. And in the app, you see that community and communal collective spirit. I know we're on a probably audio, so I don't know if anybody's going to see this, but if you go to the app and you look at the action fund, you will see the number of likes that have been received across the network for the 8 different causal areas, expressed as a percentage. And that percentage is then a percentage of the total action fund that we, Supernova, put into the pot to be distributed. And supernovas, I would add, supernovas are kind of like a super like, basically. You give a supernova when you see something you love. And that supernova is worth 10 times the normal like, a regular like. So it's like 10 votes. And to give a supernova, you have to first earn one. And you earn one through good citizenship, if you like, through being a good person, through liking, engaging, being involving, inclusive, kind, inviting others, liking things, not being called out for any, misbehavior by our 24/7 human moderators who are there to ensure there is no toxicity. And eventually you will earn the right to give a supernova, and you know that you have when the supernova symbol glows on all the posts. And when you give it, you will be treated to a visual effect. I'm going to show you what it's like, Gregor. I know that we can't show the audience right now, but at least you'll see it. So I'm going to like this, I'm going to give this post a supernova. And when I do, this is what happens. You see an animated supernova explosion comes in front of you. And I get to see that as the person that gives it, but the person that gets it doesn't. And what we're saying is that it's better to give than to receive through a number of, different techniques on Supernova, which, add up to quite a complexity of things. We are basically, conditioning, setting out, creating a space which is about positivity and kindness, not about negativity and toxicity. And the people that come to Supernova want to sustain that. They're not coming here to recreate another toxic environment. That's what they're leaving or transitioning away from the ones they're already on. So we don't have to do too much human policing, human moderation, actually. We have human moderators, but I sometimes think they're like Barcelona's goalkeepers, amongst the best trained in the world, but with nothing to do. Because we've so far served, in just the 6 months we've been going, we've served 10 million pieces of content already, in posts and comments. And you could count the number that have been contrary to our charter on the fingers of your hands and toes. There've hardly been any. Those that have been there have been removed immediately, and none of them have been extreme or profane. And that I can only imagine was because people that come to Supernova kind of get it. They kind of know it's just not a place to come fussing and fighting in the world, in the words of the great late Bob Marley. You know, it's a place to come and, you know, we're for more love and less hate. That's what we're all about. And so, yes, it is very much on our minds. And what we are therefore setting out to do is create a you know, a social media environment, because it looks like the world needs one and wants one. So a social media environment where more of those 4 trillion hours can be spent in a positive and purposeful pursuit. And that, we think, is going to be a very beneficial thing for the mental health of this generation and future generations that clearly have expressed a very, very clear and you know, habitual intent to use social media.
Mm-hmm. And so with the human moderators,
yeah,
are you planning on always having human moderators, even if it grows to billions of users? Will that always be
We'll always have human moderators. Now, what we will do as we do get bigger and as we scale is that we will get you know, more efficient at the way we do it. I don't know, because it makes it sound like we're not efficient now. What I mean is that we have plans and techniques. One is, for example, we will create, if you like, centurions, or we'll have one moderator, you know, in groups for every 100 members that come. So we'll involve the community in moderation. Doesn't mean that we will devolve moderation to the community. We will just involve them more in it. We will still have our moderators, and they will still have a number of groups for which they're responsible. But within those groups, every 100th member will have to be a moderator, or else the group won't be able to grow above its next 100 threshold. So that's one thing that we'll do. And also, artificial intelligence will help us. I don't want to deny, I don't deny that artificial intelligence is already, and I can imagine will become, an increasingly valuable tool in you know, in the moderation of social media. I'm already aware of technology which we're looking to involve in Supernova, which is excellent technology and that works for verbal moderation. Visual, not so much, not yet anyway. So I think that artificial intelligence, which we haven't yet started to properly use, and we're also developing our own as well, we haven't yet started to deploy that. That is going to help us, you know, in moderating larger amounts of content in a shorter amount of time. But, you know, yeah, we will absolutely you know, keep high levels of human moderation. In short, we'll do whatever we have to do to keep our record roughly where it is now, or as close as we humanly can to it. It's very difficult to beat where we are at the moment because we're at 0%. If we've served 10 million pieces of content and about 20 have been toxic, you know, you would call that as next to 0% as you would reasonably get without lots of decimal places. And that's kind of, we want to stay somewhere near that. But we'll definitely keep on top of it. And if that means we'll have thousands of human moderators, then so be it. Because that's what I think we are. I think that we are responsible, you know, for the effect. I don't think we can just say, well, we can't get to it because we're too big. Don't get so big then. I mean, I just think it's a very irresponsible, you know, it's an excuse for an excuse. It's not even an excuse. Sorry, we couldn't, you know, sorry, it's not our fault because we're just simply too big. Where else would you accept that as a reason for, you know, product inadequacy? So no, I don't think we will look to avoid that ourselves. I think that's what we're here to do. As I say, if we don't do that, then we're not doing what we set out to do. And after all this time, we are going to do what we set out to do.
And so the flagged content that human moderators will view, what sort of content would be flagged, or what isn't acceptable?
Well, we try to, I mean, it's a broad question, that, and we try to sum it up as best we can within our community guidelines. But there are obvious things. I mean, sorry, the obvious one, I say they're obvious, but the ones we can all imagine, really. I mean, anything that's, you know, racist, sexist, misogynistic, any of the things that are, you know, bound to cause offense, things that are overt. It's all in. It's quite a long list, and it's all in the in our community standards. References to drugs, to violence, to any of the things that in short are going to be negative or of a disturbing orientation. And I would call all of that, but I would call all of those reasonably obvious if you come at it from the point of view that we're creating a positive social network, wherein I would liken the experience, something in the neighborhood of Disney is kind of where we're at. So if you wouldn't do it at Disneyland, you shouldn't do it on Supernova, is kind of where we're at, to keep it really simple, to keep it simpler. But I've given you a few specifics. The critical thing, and this is where human moderation comes in, and where machine learning, has a lot to learn, is in intent. It's the intent of someone's comment or someone's post that really makes a difference, and that is something that requires requires an element of judgment and emotive reasoning and judgment. So yeah, it's not an easy one, but mostly people kind of know what I mean, and we have moderators that are trained and sensitive to these things, and we have a content stream which is reflective of the fact that we've demonstrably been able to do it, and we'll just keep on doing it. I mean, we're not trying. Yeah.
I was going to say, will you allow political content, or is that?
No political content. Specifically not. What a good question. I should have specified that in the things that aren't allowed. No, politics is not allowed. You're not allowed to lobby as a politician. You're not allowed to have a political page. We think that politics is a particularly divisive and unnecessary thing on our social network. There are others where they, it's grist to the mill, and it's kind of what it's all about a little bit. But we think it's exactly the sort of thing, and very specifically that sort of thing, that leads to tension and dispute. So we ask you to leave that at the door. You would just instantly be removed if you start politically lobbying for any political persuasion. There are certain beliefs, and there are certain activations or activities or that have a political overtone, and again, that would kind of boil down to intent. Just because somebody might be going to a rally, if it's done so in a kind of peaceable, and if that rally is not overtly political, in other words, it's not for a particular political party, but it might be for a point of view which is known to be supported by a particular wing of the world, of the community. Depends how that post is done. We wouldn't encourage it, by and large. We prefer it not to be. It's not why we're here. There are so many other places that you can go and bang your drum. It's just not, Supernova's just not, there's no point. You won't get much of an audience reaction because the audience here doesn't want to be part of that. That's why they've come to Supernova. Yeah.
And so I suppose you've got on the other end of that spectrum, you've got Elon Musk trying to take over Twitter. Do you have a view on that? On his?
Yeah, great. Go Elon, I would say, because the more that he and his approach goes to Twitter, then there is the free for all environment that certain people that are swathed of people. Look, I think it's a little bit like this. I think it's the moment to use this analogy in this conversation, which is that, as I told you, I've been in advertising quite a long time, and I've been in media all my life pretty much, and I've been a student of media, throughout that time. And I think we've just been through an era that was a little bit like the introduction of TV in the 1950s. And it took about 30 years for any new channels to arrive, because for the first 30 years, people would say, what, another channel? What do you want another channel for? We've got one. Well, it's only very recently that people have started to open up that the world might need something other than the one social network, pretty much, that it's got, or even the two or the three. And it was about the turn of this century that we still only in the UK had about 5 channels or something like that towards the end of the 90s, when things got finally digitized. And now we have hundreds of channels, and couldn't imagine what we would do if we only had 5 channels to choose from. What a ludicrous idea that would be. Why would we want to restrict ourselves, we would say, to just 5 channels? Well, the hostility that there was and discredit that was given to the notion of having more than a handful, tiny handful of social media, as if it was too exhausting to press another app button, is something that's only lifting now as a new generation come through. They're quite frankly bored rigid of the existing options that they had. So I think Elon can do Twitter, and I can do Supernova, and Mark can do whatever he's doing, and other guys and girls out there can do whatever channels, whatever social networks they're doing. And there's quite enough eyes and quite enough hours in those 4 trillion currently being spent to go around. I just don't think people won't come to Supernova to have a wrangle or an argument or to fuss and to fight any more than they'd go to Twitter to try and help the aged, or to try and help society, or to try and help the mental health of a generation. It's just not the priority when going to. It's a question of the priority that you'll have for a particular choice of a particular network, just as you would for a particular TV channel. I think the 2 things are quite comparable, and I suspect that the way that the market will evolve, the landscape will evolve now for social media is perhaps along similar lines to that for TV, in a sense. TV, I think, so yeah, so there we are. Each to their own, I would say.
I think that, like, the way I view it is that there's two significant issues with the way social media is now, and one is restrictions of speech, and the other one is problems with, like, the negativity that social media brings, and the addictive nature of it, and the like there's like the meaninglessness nature of it. And I think the problem is the way to solve that is you can't have one app that solves both those issues, because if you have one that says freedom, you can say whatever you want, but we also want you to be positive, it's not going to work. I think that's the way Elon Musk is. If that is his target and that is where he moves Twitter to, then that's great. And I think what you're doing as well, those are the 2 apps that solve those problems. One needs to be make meaningful connections, and the other one needs to be completely free without any restrictions.
Right. I think to a certain degree, Twitter is the yin to our yang, actually, and I don't have any problem with that at all. As I say, I welcome it, actually, because what I think we'll find, and what we are finding, but as we have yet for enough people to hear about us to know we exist. But that will happen. It's happening. It'll happen faster as we get more investment, but it's happening anyway. It'll happen faster with more investment because we'll simply be able to afford, not so much product improvements, although that's partly part of it. No, we'll be able to afford the tools of PR and the tools of marketing, the levers of those a lot. It's just the simple truth. But what I think we'll see happening is that the silent majority, because that's what I think it is, the silent majority who want to, use social media because it's fun. It is. It's quite good fun. You get to, share pictures nice and quickly, nice and promptly with a group of people that and then occasionally with people that you don't know and didn't know before. And it's in an environment and in a, it's like going to a party, and I think social networks are different types of parties. If you go to a dinner, and behavioral codes at those different types of parties differ too. If you go to a dinner party, that you, by and large, you're going to go and sit down, have a glass of wine or two, and make reasonably polite conversation, and have a pretty nice time, and you'll be thankful to the host, and you're going to do that. If you go to a fairly boozy barbecue, that's likely to run on to the evening, that, the light, as it gets darker, the music's going to, as the lights go down, as the sun goes down, the music's going to go up. It's going to get quite noisy. There'll be revelry, as we call it. There might be a mosh pit, and generally speaking, behavior will be slightly different. Well, I think it's not so dissimilar in a social network. You kind of know how you need to behave when you go to these places, and it goes to different networks, and there's few surprises. If at a dinner party you start throwing beer around, you're just going to be asked to leave, and that's not so likely to happen at the boozy barbecue. But people that are just gone for a quiet chat perhaps won't have quite such a nice time, and they'll leave themselves and go in search of it, or wait till the next invite to a dinner party. It's not a million miles from it. And I think that the silent majority, I suspect, are on the dominant social networks at the moment because they haven't been given the choice. They're back in they're somewhere in between 1950 and 1980 in TV, the TV analogy. The other channels just haven't been made available yet, or if they have been, they're unaware of that. And when they do become aware of them, they will start to watch them or to use them or to progress it into the app analogy to social media, to join them. And when they do, when they join Supernova, they will find there is every bit as much social networking going on as on any of the other social networks. But there are some very notable absences. There's no, sort of like name calling. There's no rudeness. There's no profanity. There's just none of the stuff in there that could bother you or upset you or just bring you down for the day. That just doesn't happen on Supernova. What you're going to find is that it's fun, it's inclusive, it's polite, it's respectful, it's kind. It's kind of like you would imagine you would expect to be if you met somebody in real life, and like humanity has kind of evolved itself to expect as the norm over millennia. It's only really, I think, in this last 15, 20 year social media experiment, because that's still what it is. It's still less than a blink of an eye, half a blink of an eye in terms of evolution, and yet it's impacted us so hugely because it's caught on so quick. I'm not aware of anything having caught on in the history of humankind quite as quickly, and being used quite as much as a common denominator. I mean, religions didn't reach this kind of success anywhere near as quickly. Christianity's got to about 2 billion. It's taken 2,000 years to do it. Facebook's managed 4 billion in barely over a decade. I mean, of course, it's not treated as a religion, but I am just saying in terms of people that have something in common, that are part of a community, and they do. Because there's so little choice, I would subscribe. That's coming into it. As choice emerges through just consumer insistence, through user insistence, people just leaving and going off in search of other things and getting to hear about it, then I think that will start to shift. Not necessarily to the loss of Facebook, by the way, because it's a market that's growing. Just because we gain users and gain hours spent on our platform doesn't mean Facebook have to lose it. It's or that other networks have to lose, because the market itself is growing. The arrival of Supernova is just simply part of or absorbing part of the increment that's going on in the market as a whole. I think it's growing at about, it's growing at a comfortable percentage annually, even now, when there are like 4 or even 5 billion people on social media. It's still a number that's going up annually. So yeah, that's what I think. That's how I see it. I see it as there being plenty of room for alternatives. I think there should be alternatives, and I think the ethical alternative that we represent is an essential alternative.
I was listening to a podcast the other day, and the woman on it said that the best route forward for Facebook is to declare moral bankruptcy, to basically say we're in over our heads. We've instead of, because I think
that's about any kind of bankruptcy that they're in any danger of.
Yes, yeah. I think Mark Zuckerberg's his way of dealing with these questions about ethics or the morality of Facebook is always just to say, well, it's never our intention to do that, and there's other factors at play here. And maybe his response should be, we're in over our heads. It was never our intention to make this.
I don't think anyone would hold it. I'm not sure anyone would hold that against him, but really, if he did say that, because I mean, actually, Supernova is not setting out in any way to trash or to diss any other network, by the way, that would, frankly, would be a little bit too easy, but also we don't see that as being consistent with our positioning. So we're not really here to criticize others, I should say. So when I say this, it's not meant in any way that's critical. It's meant to be it's meant to be more empathetic. And that is, yes, I think you're right. I'm not sure that anyone would hold it against him or, the management of that company for accepting that. I suppose, yeah, they have perhaps got a little bit in over their head. I mean, it's an enormous growth rate, isn't it? It's very hard to have kept up with it. It's quite clearly in some areas gotten out of control. And, who would be surprised by that, really? It's still a remarkably successful company. For its shareholders, it's done incredibly well. It's provided a service to people, definitely. I think it's done a lot of things that people have benefited from. Perhaps in recent years, people have been very disappointed by some of the news that surprised them, and I think that's what's happened. And these things do happen. Nothing lasts forever, and they've grown to a really extraordinary size. I mean, the Roman Empire didn't last forever. Things come along, things change, new ideas arrive. So, we stand on the shoulders of giants when we build Supernova, because we're able to see with a vantage point where things went wrong. And one of the ways in which we think the current crop, one of the ways we think they've gone wrong, is on an obsessive drive for growth, which I believe was brought about by a number of factors that, probably not, we can't go into now, but just the pressures anyway on them to grow so quickly. And I think that's mistaken. I don't think there's any, I don't subscribe to that. I think that is a recipe because it's greedy, it's just greedy. And the truth will out. There's no need for it. There's no point in it. The social network reach of social network reaches are just insanely huge, as we said earlier. I mean, when I started in the industry, to reach 18 million people with an ad on Coronation Street was like a huge number. I mean, you can't reach that number of people anymore with a TV commercial because they're all on social media, or they're all on something else, some other screen anyway. You would reach 3 million people with an ad in The Sun. I'm not sure you could do that anymore. And you might be able to reach them on their app, though. What I mean is that, audiences are still there. And I think that people that the people that need to reach large audiences to understand that it's going to make for a, convenience comes at a cost. That's basically where this is heading. It might be very easy to press one button and reach millions and millions and billions and billions of people, but the control that the owner of that button then has, it can become, it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? So yeah, I think that it's a company that's probably found itself, I don't know if it's out of its depth, but I wouldn't say that necessarily, but I'm sure they could never have predicted. I can't imagine how they would have predicted the enormity of the popularity that they've had. Yeah, and I think that governments have stood by and held their coat, as they've gone along doing this. I mean, why and how on earth they've never been regulated, I do not know. There's a BBC documentary out that I saw just this last week called The Instagram Effect, and I hadn't seen it. It was released in February. I hadn't seen it until recently. And I mean, it's one side of the argument, so you've got to make an allowance for that. I mean, it's coming from the BBC, which is a pretty respected, outlet, of course, but this is only one side. I think that Instagram were invited to contribute, but they decided not to. Anyway, the content of that is pretty alarming, and I think somewhere within it, it is pointed out. I think it's one of the influencers that's talking actually about how it's gotten a bit out of control. Is really a governmental responsibility. And I think that's true. I think it kind of is. I mean, obviously, if you allow a company to get started, especially by quite young people, you know, and the pressures that will be on them and the ambitions they're going to have, yeah, they're going to try and go for it. They're going to make it as big and successful as they can. That's their job. You know, of course, they are going to do that within, you know, within the law. They are going to do that. So if you need to change the law, then change the law. You know, I don't know why you're sitting around what they're sitting around waiting for. It's just bizarre. It really is. I can't imagine that any other publisher, because of course there's some loophole that prevents that word being applied, but that any other publisher of any other channel anywhere since the time of publication would have been allowed to show the sort of things that you can see on social networks. It's just appalling. Yeah, I think yeah, it's it bewilders me. Anyway, yeah, I think that that should be sorted out. I think it should be more regulation.
Going back to Supernova, so how do the algorithms of Supernova work? Is the target to keep people scrolling? Is it to keep people's attention? Is it
we have very no, we don't really use any. I mean, look, we have the algorithm basis that we have is entirely attuned to the you know, collection of and assignment of funds to the charities that you're supporting. After that, we don't force feed you any content at all. You don't get served things, you know, because one day you might look at a picture or talk about cycling. We don't for the next, you know, 500 posts show you pictures of bicycles. I find that a really infuriatingly patronizing approach, apart from anything else. Just because I want at one moment say that, oh, I quite like that beach, I don't want to be shown the next 300 posts on a bit. I mean, I don't go onto other people's social networks anyway, and this is one of the reasons. Just first of all, I find it immensely patronizing that because for one moment I think something, that is all I ever think. It's very patronizing and I'm that unimaginative. That's number one. Number two, it annoys me that I can't find a post because chronologically it's not where it was supposed to be. So we have a chronological sequence of content. It is not algorithmically influenced according to what we think you're interested in, or rather what we want to feed you. That just doesn't happen. What you're seeing is very pared back. It's very authentic. There are no filters. There are no algorithms of that type. It's a very authentic experience that you get on Supernova. That's how we intend, at least for the while, to keep it, unless there's some, you know, demand from our community to change it and make it more algorithmic. In which case, sure, we'll look at that if that's what people really want. But you know, right now, you have a look at the feed. You will get served chronologically whatever is coming in according to the people that you're following. There's the feed, and then you'll go to explore. When you go to explore, you will see what our human moderators, have selected and are recommending, because we think the content is good. That's us, human people, thinking it's good. From that, you select something. You might find new people that you haven't followed. You might want to start following them based on the content that you're seeing. And then our third tab is for supernovas. And here you'll see the absolute best on the network, things that our community have awarded supernovas to for whatever reason they've awarded them. I know, very, very, very unalgorithm, you know, not a lot of, it's very organic in the way that it works.
What do you think is going to be, is there one thing you think will bring a big amount of people over to Supernova? Is it, say, like a celebrity endorsement? Is it someone big coming over to Supernova?
I think it's just people hearing about it. Just
right.
Word of mouth. I think that's the strongest thing. I mean, yeah, within that, there are certainly techniques. I mean, if we had the right ambassadors and celebrities, and by right, I mean people that would have an authentic attachment to what we're doing in our mission. I don't just want to get half the cast of Love Island on here because people have heard of them and they've got lots of followers on Instagram. That's not my objective. It would be because you know, they've got I mean, I don't mind if the cast of Love Island join, but if that's because if they genuinely want to be part of it, it won't be because I've, you know, chased them all over the country to do it. You know, if anybody on Love Island is listening and is a big supporter of any of the charities on Supernova, then, you know, for goodness sake, get onto Supernova and recommend that your enormous following come and follow you on Instagram. Because if you do, and you should want to support British Red Cross or any of the charities that are on here, your being on Supernova will make a big difference. Your being on the other channels that you're on right now, frankly, will not, so far as I know. So I would say that, but that's because they want to. And they will want to because they hear about it. So I think for the moment, at the moment, right now, the most important thing is word of mouth. It's people hearing about it. It's more important than advertising. Advertising, which I know from a child, donkey's years, it's going to have a role to play. It's kind of, it's likely to be essential because I think advertising is, as brands start to look to be bigger and they start to look to become, you know, household names, they look to become staples. They kind of need to make sure that people hear about them and hear about them regularly. And one way to guarantee it is through advertising. But at this stage, we're not really at that stage, partly because we don't have the budgets, but also because we're just not at that stage as a brand. We haven't yet come anywhere close to a saturation point of the audience that I think is likely to adopt Supernova. We're still in the very, very earliest foothills of that particular mountain range. So we have a long way to go yet in just simple word of mouth, which is really the best. Because when people hear about you and then go and seek you out, that means that they've put some thought to whether or not they want to use your product, use your brand, use your services. If they see an ad or they see an ad on another app with an install button, they just go, you know, they're not necessarily thinking too deeply about it. They might download the app, they might look at it and think, oh, I didn't think it was about that. You know, I thought it was Supernova. I thought it was about super something else. And they've downloaded your app and then they don't want to use it. You see what I mean? So to go through word of mouth means there's a lot more conscious decision making in choosing to install and start using your app. And then you have a more engaged member of your community. And that is very important to community building. It's not about the number of people. This is why I come back to this growth obsession. It's not about the number of people. That's not the first question that anybody should ask, really. It should be more about the, you know, after a certain point, of course, there is a sort of bare minimum number. Otherwise, it's no good having 50 people, 100% of which are engaged. But a more important question is really the percentage of people engaged that is actually using the app that have downloaded it and that continue to use it, that are retained. So engagement and retention. You see a lot of people on, speaking of celebrities, you see a lot of them on the other channels. I have to keep remembering to say the other channels and not naming them. But you see a lot of them on the other channels. And they might have 1 million, 2 million, 3 million, 10 million people following them. And you'll look at the actual engagement of their posts and there'll be 20, 30, 20 or 30. In the case, you could, well, take someone with 500,000 followers anyway. You look at their posts and quite often you'll see 10, 15, 20, you know, maybe 30 likes and a few comments. I promise you, people get more response on Supernova. You know, if you know, regularly someone with like 40 or 50 followers, here's somebody, this guy, 28 likes for his post of a frog. This is a guy who's got, you know, he's got about 115 followers. So he's got huge levels of, you know, of engagement. And that I think is a more important reference than absolute numbers. And I think that this is what celebrities and, you know, celebrities would find if they come to Supernova. When they come to Supernova, they're going to find that those that they bring are really much more engaged, partly because it's a bloody nice experience. It's a pleasant place to come. You know. And so it's a pleasant environment for their content as well. It's a good brand to be associated with if you're a celebrity and if you're an advertiser or sponsor and if you're a charity for that matter. It's a sort of virtuous circle. That's its objective.
What do you see, where do you want Supernova to be in the next 5 years?
Well, I want it to be at a point where it has 5% share of the global market. And that's a big want, you know, but that is, you asked me, so that's what I want. That would mean a 200 million strong community. And it would also mean that we're donating, a very significant amount, something over, it's in the neighborhood of a couple of billion pounds annually to the charities and good causes that we are, that we're associated, that are partnered with us. So that's what I want. And that is going to take some doing, but stranger things have happened. I've been looking back at the early days of the other social networks, just yesterday, to see how their paths went from because the very earliest days. It's almost like the dark ages for in the historic period of some of those, because not that much was said or recorded, because of course nobody had heard of them in their first few years. Facebook is perhaps a little bit of an exception, but mostly, you didn't get to hear about these networks widely until they reached 50, 60, 70 million users. And then they took off like crazy because you heard of them. So what can happen, and what seems to happen, is that, the first 2 or 3 years, they're still healthy. They're in the millions, but it's really once they get beyond a certain point that the network effect really kicks in. So 200 million seems a lot, and it is a lot. There's no question about it. But if you get north of a certain point, then I believe it becomes, a little bit more straightforward. So that's what I want. Yeah, and ultimately, we'll see. But Deloitte, I think it is, tells us that 80% of millennials only want to, use brands that align with their values and buy from brands who put others' interests first. Well, we are that brand in the social media world, so it could be that our market is much bigger. But if we get to a 5% share, then I think we'll be sort of like pointing in the right direction.
And so where can people download Supernova? And this will probably be a stupid question, but where can people follow you and stay up to date with what you're doing?
Oh, well, then, so they can download Supernova from the app stores, either, the Apple App Store or from Google Play. Please do. It's there right now. Please just head along to your store and install. You can find me on Supernova at Dominic. So please do. Please come to Supernova and come and follow me. Follow me there. You can also find me on LinkedIn, Dominic O'Mara. I don't mind giving them a reference to. You can also find me there. But please do. But best of all, come to Supernova and find me there at Dominic, and I will be, delighted to hear from you. I'll be honored to have you come join us.
Well, Dominic, thank you very much for taking the time. I imagine your time is very valuable. Obviously, you're very busy.
It's a great pleasure, and it's a very important thing to do. Great to speak to you, Gregor. Thank you very much indeed. It's been lovely talking to you. You're a tremendously calming interviewer, by the way. I've enjoyed it immensely, and if I can help you with anything else, please let me know. And look forward to hearing this. And God bless everybody that's listening. Thank you very much for doing so. I hope you enjoy Supernova when you get there. I'd love to hear what you think of it. But most of all, have a terrific day and great lives. And I hope to see you in due course. See you soon.
I'm hoping in maybe the coming years we'll do another podcast and we'll look back.
Yeah, why don't we?
Targets and you've grown.
Why don't we imagine we'll do this? Yeah, we'll do this periodically, and you can sort of keep tabs on the progress and see how we're doing against that 5%, which feels like honestly like such an enormous number. I can't tell you, but I think the thing is, if you don't set out for it, how on earth is it going to happen? That's the thing. And you get more. As I say, I've had a look at the early years, and what I'm saying actually isn't that mad. If you look at, I think Snap was at about 40,000 users after 9 months, a year or something like that, from their first proper seed infusion of money. Arguably, we're yet to get that first proper infusion. I mean, we've had investment; it's been wonderful. I'm grateful for all of it. They've had the Snap had a bit more at the point I'm talking about. So I think we will. I think we'll get there. But look, we've got to take it one step at a time. But that is our goal, since you quite reasonably ask. So there we are. Right. Yeah, let's keep in touch. Let's do it again. Look forward to it.
Perfect. Well, have a good day. I hope it's productive. And
yeah, you
I'll
too,
see you soon.
Gregor. All right.